Hi, welcome to the second episode of Writer Reader. As you can see, I still don't have a couch. Last night, we're trying to find as our German friends say, Stammtisch, the place where you go and you feel welcome, almost to the point where they save you a seat. Haven't found it yet, but we did go to a bar that was rock bar themed. It's the kind of place where you order a wine or beer just to be sure. So today, I'm discussing a book that I actually read in May of 2019 by Isabel Wilkerson, and it's called The Warmth of Other Suns. And I even reviewed it on my UBigTalker website, link below. Since it's been 5 years since I read it, I can't recall how I added it to my list, but I'm guessing it has something to do with hearing her on the New York Times book review podcast. And it's a book that I've kept recommending to people over the years, and it comes back to me quite often, and so that's why I wanted to include it here in my second episode. This book is a must-read for anybody wanting to get a broader view of history. As far as I know, her book was the first to cover the Great Migration cover to cover. Around 1910, 1915 through the 70s, there was a great migration of the African-American population from the South to the North, to the West, to the East. It's something that I had never heard of before then. So that really says a lot, the fact that I had never heard about this. You know, partly, it wasn't covered by the media. It wasn't taught in schools. But also my positionality and the fact that I didn't need to learn about it. She brilliantly conveys this history through the story of three people who migrated to Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York City. It's classified as narrative nonfiction, and it reads like a novel. You're not going to be reading this and thinking, oh God, I've got to slog through this history. No, you are engaged by these characters because they're real people and because she did such a great job of bringing them to life. So the stories are heartbreaking, and they describe the devastating conditions that led these characters to have to leave the South. And I think even more importantly, it describes this promised land of the North or the West or the East, Northeast, as not being what it was supposed to be. The walls were still up, but they were just invisible. You didn't know what they were. Basically, The Warmth of Other Suns follows these three characters, Ida Mae Brandon Gladney, George Swanson Starling, and Robert Joseph Hershing Foster over decades as they join 6 million other African Americans fleeing from Southern oppression. Let's talk a little bit about Isabel Wilkerson. It was hard for me to find information, as I have on some other authors, about their writing style or their writing habits, because most of what I was finding was pertaining more to the topics at hand. So her latest book, Cast, which I am reading, what I found was a lot of information about the Great Migration, about her book, not exactly on her writing process, but I did find a few cool things that I will share in a minute. Isabel Wilkerson was the first African American to win a Pulitzer Prize in the history of American journalism, and the first Black American to win for individual reporting. You can really see her journalism work come through this book. In terms of writing habits, she used to write in total silence, but when she started writing Cast, she started listening to music. And in a video I link below where she's talking to Obama, she thanks former President Obama for introducing her to Philip Glass, and she found that his music helped get her through that writing process. How about you? Do you write to music or do you write in total silence? For me, it depends. If I'm hearing like my neighbor next door, she's kind of loud, I will put some what I call reading music on that I've created. Another thing she said about how she approaches her books, I'm going to give you this quote now. I don't like to have any preconceived notions when I'm going in. I like to hear the story as it unfolds in front of me. Particularly with narrative, it's got to be about the story that's being told. It's got to be about the character, the protagonist whose story you're hearing. If you go in with a preconceived idea or too much information, you might miss something because it doesn't sound as fresh or as new to you because you kind of know it already. And I think that's so true. And that's true in fiction writing as well. If you have too many ideas about who this person might be, you might not let them surprise you. How she wrote this book, her inspiration. So the title itself comes from another writer, a poet who actually died in 1960, Richard Wright. I was leaving the South to fling myself into the unknown. I was taking a part of the South to transplant in alien soil, to see if it can grow differently, if it could drink of new and cool rains, bend in strange winds, respond to the warmth of other suns, and perhaps to bloom. Here's why she began this work in her own words. I began this work because I wanted to pull readers deep inside perhaps the greatest untold story of the 20th century. I wanted readers to imagine themselves in a hot, open field facing endless rows of cotton needing to be picked, having to bear the arcane laws of an arbitrary caste system, and having to labor over the decision of their lives, whether to stay or whether to go. Basically, she was motivated by this untold story of trauma and pain and also perseverance. And I think that's probably what motivates a lot of us to write. I also love the places that she went to visit the people she interviewed. So she interviewed like 1,200 people, basically over the period of 15 years, which is simply incredible. So she found these people in senior centers, AARP meetings, quilting clubs, high school reunions, union meetings, Catholic masses in Los Angeles, Baptist churches. She gathered the voices of both the famous and the unknown. In terms of structure, it's interesting because I have looked also to other authors and how they structure their books. She looked to The Grapes of Wrath, another migration story, but this one, of course, was covered in our history of the Dust Bowl era. And so she was really intrigued by that structure, and that's kind of what prompted her to structure her book the way she did. And it was around the same time, actually, this migration. So it also struck her that these two parallel migrations were happening, but one was documented, the other was not. The other thing I found inspiring was how, you think about her process, 15 years, 1,200 people say, oh my gosh, it's too big of a task. How can I even start? So what she said, in some ways, it's like preparing a meal. It all starts with the flour, the baking powder, the spices, and the garlic. You start small. For instance, she would say, okay, today I'm covering Ida May's Move to Chicago. So one piece of the puzzle. So that's so helpful. These discussions pair very well with Euros, which is a Greek word that means around. Hello. I think this is only available here. I'm not sure if it's in the US, but it's called gyros. They are the most delicious little things that I've had. Just fry them on up like any kind of meat. They are made out of pea protein. Peas. Peas are good for you. I love cooking in my cast iron pans. Oh, it's so good. So my impressions of this book, it's an epic book, first of all, and I don't say that lightly. In addition to the lovingly compassionate ways that she depicts her characters or the people, the protagonists in this book, I was struck at the time by the following. In discussing the Jim Crow South, she notes that white people also became prisoners. What few people seem to realize, or perhaps dared admit, was that the thick walls of the caste system kept everyone in prison. In fact, the concept moved me so much that at the time I wrote a song called New West, which I'll link below. And this quote I love from the book: "They did what human beings looking for freedom throughout history have often done. They left." Have you read this book? What did you think? What were your takeaways? Here's the part of our segment where we put the protagonist, in this case 3, on the therapist's couch. Although in this instance, I think the reader needs to go on the therapist's couch because it's pretty heavy. Here's what the doctor ordered. So how's my book going, in case you asked, maybe you didn't ask. I've made some progress on my character, Mabel, the grandmother I showed you pictures of from AI in the previous video. A man that she really trusts that's dating her daughter has possibly betrayed her. And I also AI generated his image. His name's Abe. I basically wanted somebody that was handsome enough to be kind of like a con man character, but sort of sympathetic. Prompted it to look somewhat like Jack Kerouac. Maybe he's an alcoholic. He wears suits, but they're kind of loose fitting. So I think it did a pretty good job. So how is your book going? Are you writing a book? Do you want to write a book? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for tuning in. See you next time.